The auction hammer fell with a resounding crack that echoed through the Meridian Gallery, and Serafina Monterey felt her heart skip a beat. She had just acquired a Monet for $3.2 million under her pseudonym, S. Monterey, while her billionaire husband sat 12 miles away in his office, completely unaware that his wife had just orchestrated one of the largest art deals of the month. "Congratulations, Ms. Monterey," whispered Marcus Flynn, the gallery director, as he approached her discreet corner seat. "Your client will be thrilled with this acquisition." Serafina nodded curtly, already calculating the commission that would fund her escape plan for another few months. 5 years of marriage to Caspian Eldridge had taught her that financial independence wasn't just smart, it was survival. Her phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Holloway, the housekeeper. "Mr. Eldridge will be home for dinner tonight. Shall I prepare for two?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. In 5 years, they had shared dinner alone exactly 7 times, and each occasion had been more suffocating than the last. Serafina typed back quickly, "No, I have a client meeting." It wasn't entirely a lie. She did have a meeting, with herself, in the small apartment she rented under her professional name in Lower Manhattan. The apartment Caspian knew nothing about, just like he knew nothing about her thriving art consultation business, her growing bank account, or the fact that his untouched wife had built an entire life beyond the gilded cage of their Hamptons estate. The ride back to the mansion gave her an hour to transform from S. Monterey, respected art consultant, back into Serafina Eldridge, the invisible wife. She changed from her sharp business suit into the soft, muted colors that Caspian preferred, though she wondered if he even noticed what she wore anymore. The Eldridge estate sprawled across 15 acres of manicured perfection, its colonial architecture commanding respect from everyone except the woman who lived there. Serafina entered through the side door, a habit she had developed to avoid any chance encounters with her husband in the main foyer. "Mrs. Eldridge." Mrs. Holloway appeared instantly, as if she had been waiting. "Mr. Eldridge asked me to inform you that he'll be working late again tonight." Relief and disappointment warred in Serafina's chest, though she had long ago stopped examining which emotion won. "Thank you, Mrs. Holloway. I'll be in my studio." The east wing of the mansion housed what Caspian generously called her art studio, though it was really just an elaborate place for her to maintain the fiction that she was a dilettante housewife who painted watercolors. In reality, the studio served as her research center, where she analyzed market trends and prepared acquisition reports for her actual clients. She was deep in valuation spreadsheets when she heard the sound that always made her freeze: Caspian's footsteps in the hallway. Heavy, deliberate, approaching her door. He paused outside, and she could see his shadow beneath the crack. 30 seconds passed. A minute. Then the shadow moved away. This ritual had repeated itself hundreds of times over 5 years. He would come to her door, hesitate, then leave. She had stopped wondering what he wanted to say, just as she had stopped hoping he would actually say it. Her laptop chimed with an encrypted message from a new potential client. High-profile collector seeking discreet acquisition of post-impressionist works. Budget exceeding $50 million. The kind of client that could set her free within a year if she played it right. Serafina began typing her response when her studio door opened without warning. Caspian stood in the doorway, still wearing his charcoal business suit, his dark hair disheveled, as if he had been running his hands through it. "We need to talk," he said, his voice carrying an edge she hadn't heard before. Her fingers moved instinctively to close the laptop, but his eyes were already scanning the papers scattered across her desk. Financial projections, gallery contact lists, commission statements. Interesting reading material for a watercolor hobbyist, Caspian said, stepping into the room. Serafina's pulse quickened, but years of living with a man who analyzed weaknesses for a living had taught her to mask panic. "I've been helping Charlotte Pemberton with some art investments. Nothing serious." Charlotte Pemberton. He picked up one of her business cards, sleek black with silver lettering that read S. Monterey, Art Acquisition Specialist. Interesting that she would need someone with such professional credentials for casual advice. The air between them crackled with tension that had nothing to do with their usual cold distance. This was dangerous territory, and they both knew it. "How long?" he asked. "How long what? How long have you been living a double life under my roof?" Caspian's phone erupted with the sharp trill that meant Lysander Whitmore was calling, and the timing couldn't have been worse. He stood in Serafina's studio, her secret business cards still in his hand, while his wife stared at him with the kind of defiance he hadn't seen from her since their wedding night. "Answer it," Serafina said coolly. "We both know business always comes first." The barb hit its mark, but Caspian ignored the call. Lysander could wait. His wife's deception, apparently years in the making, took priority. "You want to know how long?" Serafina arose from her chair, moving to the window that overlooked the gardens. 3 years. Maybe 4. Hard to remember exactly when survival became more important than playing the perfect, invisible wife. Survival. The word came out harsher than he intended. You live in a $15 million estate. You have access to accounts most people couldn't dream of. Access. She turned to face him, and something flickered in her green eyes that he had never seen before. Interesting choice of words. Access implies permission, doesn't it? And permission can be revoked. His phone rang again. This time he answered. "Caspian." Lysander's voice dripped false concern through the speaker. "We need to discuss the Henderson acquisition. My lawyers have found some interesting discrepancies in your filing documents." Caspian watched Serafina's expression sharpen at the mention of Henderson. She knew that deal. It was worth $200 million and had taken him 8 months to structure. "There are no discrepancies, Lysander. Your lawyers are fishing. Perhaps we should meet. Tomorrow, my office. 10 a.m. The line went dead before Caspian could respond. When he looked up, Serafina was studying him with the intensity of someone solving a puzzle. "Henderson Industries," she said. "The shipping conglomerate you acquired last month. What kind of discrepancies? How do you know about Henderson?" "I read. The Wall Street Journal covered it extensively." She paused. "Among other sources." There was something in her tone that suggested those other sources might be more intimate than newspaper coverage. Caspian felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the same sensation that had kept him away from her for 5 years. "Serafina, about that night." "Don't." The word came out sharp enough to cut glass. "Whatever you're about to say, whatever explanation you think you owe me after 5 years, just don't." But the memory was already surfacing, dragging him back to their wedding night when everything had gone wrong. The champagne that had tasted off. The way the room had spun. The moment he had reached for her and seen terror in her eyes, realizing something was desperately wrong with his mind, his body, his control. "You don't understand what happened that night." "I understand enough." Serafina moved toward the door. "I understand that my husband couldn't stand to touch me, and I've spent 5 years wondering if it was something I did or something I am." She was halfway to the door when it opened from the outside. A woman with short auburn hair and sharp features stepped into the room, her expression all business. "Mrs. Eldridge, I apologize for the intrusion, but we need to talk immediately." Caspian had never seen this woman before, but Serafina's face went pale. "Octavia, what are you doing here?" "We agreed to meet at the usual place. Plans change when people start getting killed." Octavia's eyes flicked to Caspian. "Mr. Eldridge, I'm Octavia Thorne. Your wife hired me 6 months ago to investigate some irregularities surrounding your business partnerships." "You hired a private investigator?" Caspian's voice was dangerously quiet. "I hired someone to find out why my husband has been acting like a stranger for 5 years, Serafina shot back. "Clearly, I was right to be concerned." Octavia pulled a manila folder from her briefcase. "The Henderson deal? Those aren't random discrepancies Lysander Whitmore found. Someone's been systematically falsifying documents in your name, Mr. Eldridge. Creating shell companies, moving money through dummy corporations." She spread photographs across Serafina's desk. Bank statements, incorporation papers, signatures that looked like Caspian's but felt wrong somehow. "Your cousin Sterling Ashworth has been forging your signature for at least 2 years. And 3 hours ago, the accountant who helped me trace these documents was found dead in his apartment." The studio fell silent except for the ticking of the antique clock on the mantel. Caspian stared at the evidence of his cousin's betrayal while his mind raced through the implications. "Sterling's been working with Lysander," he said, the pieces clicking together. "That's how Lysander always seems to know my moves before I make them." "It gets worse," Octavia continued. "The shell companies aren't just about money. They've been used to purchase art, specifically through high-end auction houses. Expensive pieces that disappear into private collections." Serafina's intake of breath was sharp. "Money laundering through art sales. It's perfect, subjective valuations, private buyers, international markets. You know about money laundering? Caspian asked. I know about art markets. And when someone like your cousin suddenly starts buying $15 million paintings through companies that didn't exist 6 months ago, it raises questions. Octavia closed the folder. Mrs. Eldridge, someone followed me here tonight. We need to assume they know you've been investigating this. The weight of the situation settled over them like a heavy blanket. 5 years of distance, secrets, and mutual deception had led them to this moment, standing together against threats neither had seen coming. Caspian looked at his wife, really looked at her, for the first time in years. The woman he had been protecting from his own demons had been building weapons of her own. What do you need from me? He asked. Serafina met his eyes steadily. The truth. All of it. Starting with what really happened on our wedding night. The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp October air that usually cleared Caspian's head, but today brought no clarity. He sat in his home office at 6 a.m., staring at the evidence Octavia had left behind, when Serafina appeared in his doorway carrying 2 cups of coffee. Peace offering, she said, setting one on his desk. Or fuel for war. Depends on how this conversation goes. She had dressed for business in a navy suit he had never seen before, and her hair was pulled back in a style that made her look like the executive she apparently was. The transformation from invisible wife to confident professional unnerved him more than he cared to admit. Monterey, he said without preamble. Clever pseudonym. Almost like you wanted me to figure it out eventually. Serafina settled into the chair across from his desk. You've known. I've suspected for 6 months. Had it confirmed yesterday when I saw your business cards. He picked up one of the photographs Octavia had left. What I didn't know was that my wife had become one of the most respected art acquisition specialists on the East Coast. Respect is earned through competence, not marriage certificates. Fair point. Caspian leaned back in his chair. Your client list reads like a who's who of American wealth. The Astors, the Vanderbilt Foundation, 3 different tech billionaires from Silicon Valley. You investigated me. I protected my interests. There's a difference. Serafina's laugh held no humor. Your interests. Right. And where did I factor into those interests, exactly? The question hung between them like a loaded weapon. Caspian had spent 5 years avoiding this conversation, but current circumstances made avoidance impossible. You want the truth about our wedding night. He stood and moved to the window overlooking the gardens. I was drugged. Someone slipped something into my champagne during the reception. By the time we got to our suite, I couldn't think straight, couldn't control my actions. He heard her sharp intake of breath, but didn't turn around. I saw the fear in your eyes and realized I was the cause of it. So I left, spent the night in the guest room, and every night since, because I couldn't trust myself not to hurt you. You thought I was afraid of you? Now he did turn. Serafina was staring at him with an expression he couldn't read. Weren't you? I was afraid of disappointing you, of not being experienced enough, sophisticated enough. When you left, I assumed I had failed some test I didn't even know I was taking. The revelation hit him like a physical blow. 5 years of mutual misunderstanding, built on a foundation of one terrible night that had been orchestrated by someone else. Who knew about the champagne? Serafina asked. Who had access? Sterling was best man. He personally handed me that glass, said it was a special vintage. Caspian's hands clenched into fists. I trusted him. And now he's systematically destroying your company from the inside. Serafina pulled out her phone. Octavia sent me something this morning. Lysander Whitmore has been acquiring Eldridge Corporation stock through 12 different shell companies over the past 18 months. He now owns 18% of your company. The number was staggering. 18% meant Lysander could block major decisions, influence board meetings, potentially force a merger or acquisition. How is that legal? It's not. Securities law requires disclosure of ownership over 5%. But if the ownership is hidden through shell companies that appear unrelated, the SEC can't track it. Serafina stood and moved to his desk. Unless someone with knowledge of art market transactions helps them connect the dots. The art purchases Octavia mentioned. Money Laundering 101. Sterling buys expensive art through shell companies, then sells it to private collectors at inflated prices. The collectors pay the difference in cash, which gets funneled back to Lysander to buy more of your stock. Caspian studied his wife's face, seeing intelligence he had somehow missed for 5 years. You could trace those transactions. I could do more than trace them. I know most of the major collectors, the auction houses, the private dealers. If Sterling's been moving art through my world, I can find out where and how much. That would put you in danger. I'm already in danger. Octavia said someone followed her here last night. That means they know I'm involved. Serafina met his eyes steadily. Besides, this is my world now. I know it better than anyone realizes. She was right, and they both knew it. But the thought of Serafina deliberately walking into Sterling and Lysander's crosshairs made something protective and primal surge in Caspian's chest. If we do this, we do it together. No more secrets, no more separate lives. And after? When Sterling and Lysander are dealt with, what happens to us? The question was inevitable, but Caspian found he didn't have an answer that wouldn't sound like a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. I don't know, he said honestly, but I'd like to find out. Serafina nodded slowly. Then we'd better make sure there is an after. The alliance formed by necessity rather than choice, and within 48 hours, Caspian's home office had transformed into a war room. Octavia had installed sophisticated tracking equipment across 2 tables, while Serafina spread art market databases across every available surface. The formal distance that had defined the Eldridge household for 5 years evaporated under the pressure of shared purpose. Lysander's people made contact with Harrison Blackwell 2 weeks ago, Octavia announced, pointing to surveillance photos spread across the conference table they had commandeered from the dining room. Blackwell owns the largest private art storage facility in Manhattan. Climate-controlled, maximum security, perfect for hiding expensive acquisitions. Caspian leaned over Serafina's shoulder to examine the photos, close enough to catch her subtle perfume and feel the warmth radiating from her skin. The proximity was the most intimate they had been since their wedding night, and he found himself fighting the urge to let his hand brush against hers. Blackwell's facility handles storage for half the major auction houses in the city, Serafina said, apparently unaffected by their closeness. If Sterling's been moving art through there, Blackwell would have records of every piece, every transaction, every client. Getting those records legally would take months, Octavia pointed out. Getting them illegally would take about 30 minutes if we had someone who knew the facility's layout. I know the layout, Serafina said quietly. I've stored pieces there for clients dozens of times. Blackwell gives private tours to major collectors and their representatives. Caspian straightened. Absolutely not. If Sterling suspects you're investigating him, walking into his storage facility would be suicide. Not if I go as S. Monterey, conducting routine business for a client. Serafina's tone was matter-of-fact, but Caspian caught the slight tremor in her voice. Blackwell knows my professional reputation. A visit wouldn't raise suspicions. What client? Octavia asked. Helena Monterey. My mother. Serafina's expression darkened slightly. She's been after a particular Degas sculpture for months. I could arrange a viewing, get us access to the storage areas. The plan was risky, but viable. Octavia could provide surveillance support, while Serafina gained legitimate access to Blackwell's facility. Caspian would monitor remotely, ready to mobilize security if anything went wrong. They were finalizing details when Serafina's phone rang. The name Mother appeared on the screen, and Serafina's face went pale. Helena, she answered, putting the call on speaker. Darling, I need to see you immediately. There's something we need to discuss about your father's estate. Father's estate was settled 3 years ago. Not everything, sweetheart. Meet me at the Meridian Club in an hour. Come alone. The line went dead. Serafina stared at the phone with an expression Caspian had never seen before, a mixture of suspicion and dread. Your mother never calls, he observed. Mother never calls unless she wants something expensive or she's in trouble. Serafina gathered her papers. Either way, this isn't coincidence. An hour later, Serafina sat across from Helena Monterey in the exclusive dining room of the Meridian Club, studying the woman who had orchestrated her arranged marriage with the same attention she gave to evaluating a potentially forged painting. Helena looked impeccable as always, silver hair perfectly styled, jewelry understated but expensive, posture that spoke of old money and older secrets. But her hands trembled slightly as she lifted her martini glass. You look well, darling. Marriage suits you. Does it? Because most people would say I look like a woman who's been living as a stranger in her own home for 5 years. Helena's smile faltered. Marriage is complicated, Serafina. Your father and I had our difficulties, but we found ways to make it work. Is that what this is about? Marriage advice? Serafina leaned forward. Or is it about Lysander Whitmore? The effect was immediate. Helena's carefully controlled expression cracked, revealing something that looked like terror. I don't know what you're talking about. Mother, I know about the money. The payments to shell companies, the art transactions, the stock purchases. I know you've been financing Lysander's acquisition of Eldridge Corporation. Helena set down her glass with a shaking hand. You don't understand the situation. Then explain it to me. Helena glanced around the dining room, then leaned closer to her daughter. 20 years ago, your father and I were driving home from the Pemberton's anniversary party. It was raining, and Robert had been drinking. I should have been driving, but we were arguing about money, about his gambling debts. Serafina felt ice forming in her stomach. We hit a pedestrian, a young man, walking along the side of the road. He died instantly. Helena's voice dropped to a whisper. We panicked. Instead of calling police, we left. Drove home, cleaned the car, never spoke of it again. Mother, 3 years ago, someone sent me photographs. The damaged car, police reports that had been buried, witness statements that were never filed. They wanted $50 million to keep quiet. Sterling Ashworth. Helena nodded miserably. He said he needed the money to invest in art, that it would be clean and untraceable. I thought if I paid him, it would be over. But it never ended. It got worse. He wanted more money. Then he wanted me to convince you to divorce Caspian. Then he wanted access to your art connections. Helena reached across the table to grasp Serafina's hand. I never meant for you to get hurt, darling. I was trying to protect our family. Serafina pulled her hand away. You've been protecting a lie while destroying my marriage and my husband's company. Sterling said Caspian would be fine, that he just wanted to teach him a lesson about family loyalty. Sterling murdered someone yesterday, Mother. An accountant who discovered the money trail. This isn't about family loyalty. It's about greed and revenge. Helena's face crumpled. What have I done? You've given me the evidence I need to stop him. Serafina stood from the table. But first, you're going to help us get into Blackwell's storage facility. Back at the estate, Octavia was unconscious in the hospital, her apartment ransacked and her equipment destroyed. The message was clear. Sterling knew they were closing in, and he was willing to escalate to violence. Caspian found Serafina sitting in the garden as sunset painted the sky in shades of amber and crimson. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of her mother's revelations. Octavia's going to be fine, he said, settling beside her on the stone bench. Concussion, some bruising, but she'll recover. She got hurt because of me, because I dragged her into this mess. She got hurt because she's good at her job and Sterling's getting desperate. Caspian studied his wife's profile. Your mother's confession changes everything. We have motive now, and a paper trail. My mother killed someone, Caspian, 20 years ago, and I never knew. Your mother made a terrible mistake 20 years ago, and Sterling's been exploiting it ever since. There's a difference between accident and calculated evil. Serafina turned to look at him, and he saw tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. Without thinking, he reached out and traced his thumb along her cheekbone, wiping away moisture that hadn't quite fallen. We're going to stop him, he said softly. For the first time in 5 years, Serafina leaned into his touch instead of pulling away. Promise me something, she whispered. Anything. When this is over, no more secrets between us. No more separate lives. Whatever we become it honestly. Caspian's answer came without hesitation. I promise. The kiss that followed was inevitable. 5 years of suppressed longing and newly discovered trust finally finding expression. It was gentle at first, tentative, then deeper as Serafina's arms wound around his neck and pulled him closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caspian rested his forehead against hers. We should go inside, he said, though he made no move to stand. We should, Serafina agreed, but her fingers were already working at the buttons of his shirt. That night, for the first time since their wedding, they shared the same bed. And for the first time ever, they shared each other completely, honestly, with nothing held back and no secrets between them. Dawn broke with the kind of gray light that suggested storms ahead, and Serafina awoke in Caspian's arms for the first time in 5 years. His breathing was steady against her hair, one arm draped protectively across her waist, and for a moment she allowed herself to believe that everything had changed permanently. Then her phone buzzed with a text message, and reality crashed back. "Unknown number," she murmured, carefully extracting herself from Caspian's embrace to read the screen. "Your investigator friend survived. Others won't be so lucky. Stop digging or join her in the hospital." A concerned friend. Caspian was fully awake instantly, reading over her shoulder. Sterling's not even bothering to hide behind anonymity anymore, which means he's either getting careless or he's ready to make his final move. Serafina slipped from the bed, reaching for the silk robe draped over a nearby chair. "We need to accelerate our timeline. About last night was perfect." She turned to face him, and the vulnerability in his expression made her chest tighten. "But if we don't survive the next 48 hours, it won't matter how perfect it was." Caspian rose and moved toward her, still gloriously naked and apparently unconcerned about it. "It matters to me. Then help me make sure we have a future to explore what it means." He kissed her forehead, a gesture so tender it nearly undid her resolve. "What do you need?" "Coffee, a secure phone line, and access to your family's legal documents from 25 years ago. If Sterling's been planning this since before our wedding, there has to be evidence of his resentment somewhere." An hour later, they were back in the war room when Mrs. Holloway announced a visitor. Detective Maria Santos from the Nassau County Police stood in the foyer, her expression grim. "Mr. and Mrs. Eldridge, I need to speak with you about Marcus Flynn." Serafina's blood turned to ice. Marcus was the gallery director who had handled her Monet acquisition just days ago. "What about Marcus?" "He was found dead in his apartment this morning. Single gunshot wound to the head." His neighbor reported hearing the shot around 3 a.m. Detective Santos consulted her notebook. The apartment was searched, but whoever did it was looking for something specific. They left expensive electronics, jewelry, cash. Only thing missing was his computer and any business files. Marcus handled private art transactions for high-profile clients, Serafina said carefully. "If someone wanted information about those clients, that's what we're thinking." His assistant mentioned that he'd been nervous lately, said he'd discovered something irregular about some recent sales. Santos studied Serafina's face. "Your name came up in his appointment calendar, Mrs. Eldridge, multiple times over the past 6 months." Caspian moved closer to Serafina, a protective gesture that didn't go unnoticed by the detective. "I've worked with Marcus on several art acquisitions. It's not unusual for us to meet regularly." Serafina kept her voice steady. "Did his assistant mention what kind of irregularities he'd discovered?" "Something about forged provenance documents and inflated appraisals." She said he was planning to contact the FBI's art crime team. Santos closed her notebook. "I'll need you both to come in for formal statements today." After the detective left, Serafina sank into a chair, the weight of Marcus's death settling over her like a physical burden. "He died because of me," she said quietly. "Because he helped me trace those art transactions. He died because Sterling is eliminating anyone who threatens his operation." Caspian knelt beside her chair. "This isn't your fault, isn't it? I dragged Marcus into this when I asked him to flag unusual sales patterns. I as good as painted a target on his back." Caspian took her hands in his. "Sterling painted that target, and he's been planning this for years, long before you ever spoke to Marcus. You don't know that." "Actually, I do." Caspian stood and moved to the desk where he had spread out family documents. "I found what you asked for. Legal papers from when my father died, including the will reading." He handed her a folder marked Eldridge Estate, Final Distribution. "Sterling was supposed to inherit 40% of my father's company," Caspian said. "But 3 days before the will was read, my father changed it. Sterling got a trust fund that provided comfortable living but no corporate control." Serafina scanned the documents. "What made your father change his mind?" "I never knew until today. There's a letter here, addressed to the family lawyer but never sent." Caspian pulled out a handwritten note. "My father discovered that Sterling had been embezzling from the company for 2 years. Small amounts, carefully hidden, but enough to fund a lifestyle beyond what his salary should have allowed. So Sterling lost his inheritance and his access to the family business. And he blamed me. The letter mentions that my father was grooming me to take over the company earlier than planned because he no longer trusted Sterling." Caspian's jaw tightened. "Sterling's been planning revenge for over a decade. The drugging on our wedding night. was probably his first attempt to destroy my marriage and my reputation. When that didn't work, he got more creative. Serafina studied the timeline, pieces clicking into place. He needed someone with connections to high-end art markets to make his money laundering scheme work. That's why he targeted my mother, not just for blackmail money, but for access to my professional network. And when you started investigating, he realized you were more dangerous than he'd anticipated. The phone rang before Serafina could respond. Caspian answered on speaker. Caspian, it's Jonathan Mills. The voice belonged to Caspian's head of corporate security. You need to get down to the office immediately. Sterling's called an emergency board meeting for this afternoon. He's claiming you've been using company funds for personal investments, and he has documentation to prove it. What kind of documentation? Bank transfers, investment records, something about art purchases worth millions of dollars. He's presenting it to the board in 4 hours, and he's bringing Lysander Whitmore as an expert witness. Caspian closed his eyes. He's making his final play. There's more. The SEC received an anonymous tip this morning about potential securities fraud. They're opening an investigation into Eldridge Corporation effective immediately. After Jonathan hung up, Serafina was already moving toward her laptop. What are you doing? Fighting back. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. Sterling thinks he's been clever, but he's made one crucial mistake. Every art transaction he's used for money laundering went through galleries and auction houses where I have contacts. If I can prove the sales were fraudulent, his entire scheme falls apart. That will take weeks. Not if I call in every favor I've earned over the past 3 years. Serafina reached for her phone. Sterling wants to destroy your reputation with fabricated evidence. Let's show the board what real evidence looks like. She began dialing, and Caspian watched his wife transform into the formidable businesswoman she had become in secret. For the first time since this nightmare began, he felt hope. Catherine, it's Serafina Monterey. I need a favor, and I need it in the next 3 hours. The battle for Eldridge Corporation was about to begin, and this time, Caspian wouldn't be fighting alone. The Eldridge Corporation boardroom had never felt more like a battlefield. Caspian sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, watching Sterling present his fabricated evidence with the practiced ease of a man who had been planning this moment for years. 12 board members listened with varying degrees of skepticism and concern as Sterling laid out what appeared to be a damning case of corporate embezzlement. These bank records show systematic transfers from Eldridge accounts to private investment firms, Sterling said, clicking through a presentation that looked disturbingly professional. Funds that were then used to purchase artwork worth over $50 million, all registered to shell companies controlled by Caspian. Lysander Whitmore sat beside Sterling like a vulture waiting for carrion, occasionally nodding, as if confirming Sterling's accusations. The man's presence alone was enough to set Caspian's teeth on edge, but the fabricated documents were infuriating in their sophistication. The art purchases coincide with major corporate decisions, Sterling continued. Every time Eldridge Corporation was about to announce significant profits, money mysteriously disappeared into these art investments. Board member Patricia Howell raised her hand. Sterling, these are serious accusations. Do you have independent verification of these transactions? I have something better. Sterling's smile was predatory. I have testimony from someone with intimate knowledge of the art market who can confirm that these purchases were designed to hide assets from corporate oversight. Caspian's phone buzzed with a text message. His blood froze as he read the words. Serafina is safe for now. How long she stays that way depends on your cooperation. Resign immediately and transfer your controlling interest to Sterling, or she dies. You have 1 hour. He looked up to find Sterling watching him with barely contained satisfaction. Actually, Sterling said, I believe we should postpone this meeting. Caspian seems to have received some urgent personal news. The implication was clear to everyone in the room. Sterling had orchestrated this timing deliberately, ensuring that Caspian would be trapped in the boardroom when Serafina was taken. Gentlemen, ladies, I need to address an emergency, Caspian said, standing from his chair. We'll reconvene this meeting tomorrow. I'm afraid that won't be possible, Lysander interjected smoothly. The SEC requires resolution of these allegations before trading can resume. The board needs to vote today. Caspian's phone rang. Unknown number. Answer it, Sterling suggested. I think you'll find the call enlightening. Caspian answered on speaker. Caspian. Serafina's voice was steady, but he caught the underlying tension. I'm fine, but I think you should know that your cousin has some interesting art storage facilities. Very private, very secure. The line went dead, but the message was clear. Serafina was telling him she was at Blackwell's storage facility, and she had seen something important. Meanwhile, 30 miles away in Manhattan, Serafina sat tied to a chair in Harrison Blackwell's private office, surrounded by enough stolen art to stock a small museum. Sterling had been careless in his arrogance, bringing her to the heart of his operation instead of some anonymous warehouse. Your husband should have minded his own business, Blackwell said, pacing behind his desk. Sterling offered him multiple opportunities to step aside gracefully. Gracefully, Serafina tested the ropes, binding her wrists. You mean like his father stepped aside? The words were a shot in the dark, but Blackwell's reaction confirmed her suspicion. William Eldridge was a stubborn man who refused to see reason, Blackwell said. Sterling tried to explain that the company needed new leadership, someone who understood modern business practices. So you killed him. It was an accident. William discovered Sterling's arrangements with certain international clients, threatened to expose business relationships that were mutually beneficial but technically complex from a legal standpoint. Blackwell pulled out a gun, checking the chamber. Sterling tried to reason with him, but William became aggressive. In the struggle for the gun, William was shot. Serafina felt sick, and you've been covering it up ever since. We've been building something beautiful, an international network that moves art, money, and influence across borders without the interference of government bureaucracy. Blackwell gestured around the room. Look at what we've accomplished. Serafina looked, and what she saw was horrifying. Paintings that had been reported stolen from European museums. Sculptures that should have been in public collections. Art that represented centuries of human creativity, locked away to serve the greed of criminals. This isn't business, she said. This is theft on a global scale. This is evolution. The old ways of buying and selling art were limited by regulations, taxes, customs barriers. We created a system that transcends those limitations. While Blackwell continued his self-serving speech, Serafina noticed something crucial. The ropes binding her hands were tied around the chair's armrest with a slip knot. Blackwell might be sophisticated enough to run an international art theft ring, but he apparently didn't know how to properly restrain a prisoner. She began working her hands free while keeping her expression neutral. Sterling will be here soon, Blackwell said, checking his watch. Once your husband resigns and transfers his shares, we'll arrange for your unfortunate accident. A mugging gone wrong, perhaps. These Manhattan neighborhoods can be so dangerous. Caspian will never resign. He'll fight you until his last breath. He'll choose you over his company. Men in love always do. The casual certainty in Blackwell's voice chilled her, but it also gave her hope. If Blackwell understood that Caspian loved her, then perhaps her husband was finally ready to fight for their marriage as fiercely as he fought for his business. Back in the boardroom, Caspian was making the most difficult decision of his professional life. I need to leave, he announced. Vote however you want, but I have more important things to handle than Sterling's fabricated accusations. Caspian, Patricia Howell said urgently. If you leave now, the board will have no choice but to consider Sterling's evidence without rebuttal. Then consider it. Caspian headed for the door. But before you vote, ask yourselves why Sterling waited 5 years to discover this alleged embezzlement. Ask yourselves why Lysander Whitmore, our biggest competitor, is suddenly interested in our internal governance. And ask yourselves why Sterling looks so confident about an outcome that should depend on your deliberation. He paused at the door. My wife is in danger because she helped uncover Sterling's actual crimes. If I have to choose between saving her and saving this company, there's no choice at all. The boardroom erupted in concerned murmurs as Caspian left, already dialing Jonathan Mills. I need every security contractor we've ever used, every private investigator we have on retainer, and every surveillance contact you've developed in 30 years of corporate security, Caspian said as he strode toward the elevator. I also need the FBI's art crime team, the SEC's investigation unit, and Detective Santos from Nassau County. Conference call in 20 minutes. Sir, that's a lot of resources for. My wife has been kidnapped by people who have committed murder, art theft, securities fraud, and money laundering on an international scale. There's no such thing as too many resources. By the time Caspian reached his car, he had assembled the most comprehensive rescue operation in corporate security history. Octavia, despite her concussion, was coordinating from her hospital bed. Detective Santos was mobilizing Nassau County resources. The FBI was tracing the call that had come to Caspian's phone, and Serafina's contacts in the art world were providing intelligence about Blackwell's facility that no law enforcement agency could have obtained independently. At Blackwell's facility, Serafina had freed her hands and was working on the ropes around her ankles when she heard voices in the corridor outside. The board's in chaos. Sterling's voice carried through the door. Caspian stormed out like a man possessed. He'll give us what we want. And if he doesn't? Blackwell asked. Then we proceed with the alternative plan. Serafina dies, Caspian gets blamed for her murder, and I inherit everything as next of kin. Serafina's blood ran cold. Sterling wasn't just planning to steal the company. He was planning to destroy Caspian completely. The door opened, and Sterling entered with two men who looked like professional killers. "Hello, cousin-in-law," Sterling said pleasantly. "Ready to become a widow?" "Ready to disappoint you," Serafina replied, having finally freed her ankles. She launched herself from the chair, driving her shoulder into Sterling's stomach and sending him stumbling backward into one of his companions. The second man reached for his gun, but Serafina was already moving, grabbing a heavy bronze sculpture from Blackwell's desk and swinging it with all her strength. The sculpture connected with the gunman's wrist, and his weapon went flying across the room. Serafina dove for it, as Sterling and Blackwell shouted orders at their remaining associate. She had just reached the gun when the office door exploded inward. Caspian burst through the splintered door with 3 federal agents and Detective Santos behind him. The room erupted in chaos as Sterling's men tried to reach their weapons while law enforcement shouted commands. FBI, everyone on the ground. Nassau County Police, drop your weapons. In the midst of the confusion, Caspian's eyes found Serafina's across the room. She was crouched behind Blackwell's desk, holding a gun with steady hands and watching Sterling with the cold focus of a predator. "It's over, Sterling," Caspian said, his own weapon trained on his cousin. "The FBI has your financial records, your art transactions, everything. You have nothing," Sterling snarled. "Those records are encrypted, protected by international privacy laws." "We have something better," Serafina said, standing from behind the desk. "We have Harrison Blackwell's confession about your father's murder, recorded on my phone 20 minutes ago." Sterling's face went white. "That's impossible." Serafina held up her phone, which had been recording since the moment Blackwell started talking about William Eldridge's death. "Amazing what people will admit when they think no one's listening," she said. "Or when they're so arrogant they don't care who knows their crimes." The arrests took 2 hours. By the time the federal agents finished cataloging evidence, they had uncovered an international art theft ring worth over $200 million, securities fraud that had affected a dozen major corporations, and enough money laundering to fund a small country's government. Sterling and Blackwell were led away in handcuffs, still protesting their innocence to reporters who had somehow learned about the dramatic arrests. As the sun set over Manhattan, Caspian and Serafina stood in the empty storage facility, surrounded by recovered stolen art that would soon be returned to museums and collectors around the world. "How did you know to record Blackwell's confession?" Caspian asked. "I didn't. I was trying to call you for help, but I hit the record button by mistake." Serafina leaned against him, exhaustion finally catching up with her. "Sometimes luck matters more than planning. You saved my company. Hell, you saved my life. We saved each other." She turned in his arms, looking up at him with eyes that held no shadows, no secrets, no barriers. "Now what do we do?" Caspian's answer came in the form of a kiss that was hungry, desperate, filled with 5 years of suppressed need and the intoxicating relief of survival. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "Now we go home," he said, "and we start our marriage over. The right way this time." That night, in their bedroom that was finally truly theirs, they made love with a passion that erased 5 years of loneliness and mistrust. It was fierce and tender, desperate and patient, everything their wedding night should have been and everything their future would be. When Serafina fell asleep in Caspian's arms near dawn, she was no longer the ghost wife haunting the edges of someone else's life. She was exactly where she belonged, with the man who loved her enough to risk everything to bring her home. 3 weeks after Sterling's arrest, Serafina thought the nightmare was over. She was wrong. The first sign of trouble came at dawn, when federal agents surrounded the Eldridge estate with warrants for both Caspian's and her arrest. The charges were staggering: conspiracy, money laundering, securities fraud, and accessory to murder. Someone had orchestrated a legal framework so sophisticated that even with Sterling in custody, the destruction of their lives would continue. "This is impossible," Serafina said, watching through the bedroom window as FBI agents established a perimeter around their home. Sterling confessed. Blackwell gave them everything. Caspian was already dressing, his movements sharp with controlled fury. Sterling confessed to art theft and financial fraud. "He never admitted to murdering my father, and someone's been working very hard to make sure he never will." The doorbell rang with the aggressive persistence of law enforcement, and Mrs. Holloway's voice echoed up the stairs. "Mr. and Mrs. Eldridge, there are federal agents here with warrants." "Lysander," Caspian said grimly. Sterling was never the mastermind. He was just the inside man. 20 minutes later, they sat in their own living room while Agent Rebecca Foster read them their rights. The evidence she presented was damning. Bank records showing payments from Serafina's art consulting business to the same shell companies Sterling had used, surveillance footage of Caspian meeting with known money launderers, recorded phone calls between them discussing merchandise transfers and private collections. "Someone's been building a case against us for months," Serafina realized. "Every legitimate business transaction I've made, every conversation we've had about the investigation, it's all been taken out of context and reframed as criminal conspiracy." Agent Foster consulted her notes. "Mrs. Eldridge, our investigation shows that you've been running a sophisticated money laundering operation through art sales for over 2 years. Your husband provided the initial capital and ongoing financial backing. That's insane. You have Sterling's confession. We have Sterling Ashworth's testimony that he was recruited by you and your husband to facilitate illegal transactions. He claims he believed he was helping with legitimate international art deals until he discovered the true nature of the business." Caspian laughed bitterly. "Sterling's trying to save himself by framing us. Mr. Ashworth has provided extensive evidence to support his claims. Phone records, financial documents, even photographs of meetings between you and known criminals." Agent Foster closed her folder. "He's willing to testify against you in exchange for a reduced sentence." The manipulation was brilliant in its audacity. Lysander had spent months creating a parallel narrative that painted Sterling as a reluctant accomplice and the Eldridges as criminal masterminds. Every piece of evidence they had gathered against Sterling could be reinterpreted as evidence of their own guilt. "We need to call Jonathan Mills," Caspian said. "Mr. Mills has also been arrested," Agent Foster informed them, "as has Detective Santos and 3 members of your security team. The scope of this conspiracy is much larger than we initially realized." The web was closing around them with terrifying precision. Lysander wasn't just trying to destroy Caspian's company. He was systematically eliminating everyone who could contradict his fabricated narrative. "I want to speak with my mother," Serafina said suddenly. Agent Foster shook her head. "Helena Monterey was found dead in her apartment this morning. Apparent suicide. She left a note confessing to her role in the conspiracy and expressing remorse for involving her daughter." The room spun around Serafina. Her mother was dead, and even in death, Helena was being used as a weapon against them. "The note," Serafina whispered. "What did it say exactly?" "That she had been blackmailing various business associates to fund your art laundering operation. That she felt responsible for corrupting her daughter and destroying innocent lives." Agent Foster's expression was professionally sympathetic. She asked for forgiveness and hoped her death would end the suffering she had caused. "My mother didn't kill herself." Serafina's voice was steady despite the grief crushing her chest. "And she would never have written that note. Mrs. Eldridge, I understand this is difficult. You don't understand anything." Serafina stood, anger finally overriding shock. "My mother was being blackmailed by Sterling Ashworth, not the other way around. She was terrified of him, not working with him. And she never would have taken her own life without speaking to me first." But even as she said it, Serafina realized the horrible genius of Lysander's final move. Helena's death eliminated the one person who could have testified about Sterling's blackmail scheme. Her fabricated suicide note provided written evidence of the Eldridge's guilt, and the timing ensured that they would be too devastated and distracted to mount an effective defense. "We're being transferred to federal custody pending arraignment," Agent Foster announced. "You'll be held separately to prevent conspiracy to obstruct justice." As federal marshals escorted them to separate vehicles, Caspian caught Serafina's hand for a moment. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "Lysander's made one mistake. He's gotten too confident." "What mistake?" "He's assuming we don't have any allies left. But he's forgotten about Octavia." 3 hours later, Octavia Thorne walked into the federal courthouse wearing her best suit and carrying a briefcase full of evidence that would change everything. She had spent the past 3 weeks recovering from her injuries and building an airtight case against the real conspiracy. "Agent Foster," she announced herself to the lead FBI investigator. "I'm here to surrender evidence in the Eldridge investigation." "Ms. Thorne, you're wanted for questioning yourself. I'd advise you to listen carefully, because I'm about to save your career." Octavia opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "Everything Sterling Ashworth and Lysander Whitmore have told you is a lie, and I can prove it." The evidence Octavia presented was devastating. Audio recordings of Lysander and Sterling planning to frame the Eldridges. Photographs of Lysander meeting with the men who had killed Marcus Flynn and Helena Monterey. Financial records showing that Lysander had been funding Sterling's operations for years, not the other way around. "This recording was made yesterday," Octavia said, playing a digital file. Sterling Ashworth talking to his lawyer about his plea agreement. Sterling's voice filled the conference room. "The FBI is so eager to nail Caspian Eldridge that they're not asking the right questions. They want to believe I'm a reformed whistleblower instead of the guy who's been stealing from them for years. As long as I keep feeding them evidence against Caspian and his wife, they'll give me whatever deal I want." Agent Foster's face went pale. "How did you obtain this recording?" "Sterling's lawyer is actually my cousin. Family dinners can be very informative when people think you're unconscious in the hospital." Octavia smiled grimly. "He's been wearing a wire for me for 2 weeks. Why didn't you come forward sooner?" "Because I needed ironclad evidence. Lysander Whitmore has been planning this frame job for months. He's covered his tracks, eliminated witnesses, and corrupted enough people in law enforcement that I couldn't trust anyone." Octavia pulled out another folder. But he couldn't account for everything. The second folder contained Helena Monterey's real suicide note, the one she had written and given to Octavia 3 days before her death. "Mrs. Monterey suspected she was in danger," Octavia explained. "She wrote this note and asked me to deliver it to her daughter if anything happened to her." Agent Foster read the note aloud. "My dearest Serafina, if you're reading this, then Sterling Ashworth has carried out his threat to kill me. I should have been braver, should have told the truth years ago instead of letting him destroy our family. The accident 20 years ago was exactly that, an accident. But Sterling has used it to control me, to force me to fund his criminal enterprise. I pray that my death will not be in vain, that somehow it will provide the evidence you need to stop him. I love you, and I'm sorry for all the pain my cowardice has caused. Please forgive me. Mother." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. "Helena Monterey was murdered," Octavia continued. "Lysander's people forced her to write the fake suicide note, then killed her and staged the scene. But they didn't know about the real note she had written as insurance." Agent Foster was already reaching for her phone. "I need all units to arrest Lysander Whitmore immediately." "You're too late," Octavia said. "Lysander disappeared 12 hours ago. Private jet to the Cayman Islands, then who knows where. But Sterling's still here, and he's getting nervous." "What do you mean?" "Sterling doesn't know that Lysander has abandoned him. He thinks his plea deal is going to save him." Octavia checked her watch. Right about now, he should be getting a phone call that's going to make him very talkative. As if on cue, Octavia's phone buzzed with a text message. "Package delivered." "Package?" Agent Foster asked. A burner phone with a fake message from Lysander, telling Sterling that the FBI is onto their real plan and he needs to eliminate the Eldridges immediately. Octavia smiled. "Sterling's going to panic and try to contact his remaining associates. When he does, we'll have everything we need." The plan worked perfectly. Within 2 hours, Sterling had made 17 phone calls trying to activate a contingency plan that would result in Caspian and Serafina's deaths in federal custody. Every call was recorded, every contact was traced, and every conversation provided additional evidence of the massive conspiracy. By evening, Caspian and Serafina were released from custody with all charges dropped. Sterling was facing life in prison without parole. Lysander was the subject of an international manhunt with a $10 million bounty on his head. They stood outside the federal courthouse as the sun set over Manhattan, finally free but forever changed by the experience. "Your mother saved us," Caspian said softly. "Even in death, she found a way to protect you." Serafina wiped tears from her cheeks. "She was braver than I ever gave her credit for. She raised a daughter who was brave enough to fight back when it mattered most." Octavia joined them on the courthouse steps, looking satisfied with a job well done. "So what happens now?" Serafina asked. "Now you go home and rebuild your lives," Octavia said. "And Lysander spends the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, knowing that eventually justice will find him." As they walked toward their car, Caspian slipped his arm around Serafina's waist. "I have a confession to make," he said. "Another one? I'm not sure my heart can take any more revelations. I love you. Completely, irrevocably, forever. And I should have told you that 5 years ago instead of letting fear and guilt keep us apart." Serafina stopped walking and turned to face him. "I love you too," she said. "And I should have fought for us instead of accepting that we were just a business arrangement. So what do we do now? We start over. For real this time." The kiss they shared on the courthouse steps was captured by news photographers, but neither of them cared. They had survived betrayal, murder, and conspiracy. A few paparazzi photos seemed trivial by comparison. Their empire hadn't just been saved. It had been forged in fire and would emerge stronger than ever. 6 months after Sterling's conviction and Lysander's flight to international infamy, Caspian stood before the Eldridge Corporation Board of Directors for the first time since the conspiracy had nearly destroyed everything he had built. The same mahogany table that had witnessed his humiliation now served as the stage for his vindication. "The forensic accounting is complete," Patricia Howell announced, sliding a thick report across the table. Sterling Ashworth embezzled $47 million over a 5-year period, using increasingly sophisticated methods to hide the theft. The SEC has cleared Eldridge Corporation of all wrongdoing and commended our cooperation with their investigation. Murmurs of relief filled the boardroom. The past 6 months had been brutal for everyone involved. Stock prices had plummeted, clients had fled, and employees had endured FBI interviews and media scrutiny that had tested their loyalty to the breaking point. "There's more," Patricia continued. "The recovered assets from Sterling's art laundering scheme, combined with insurance payouts and restitution from criminal proceedings, have actually improved our financial position. Eldridge Corporation is stronger today than it was before the conspiracy was uncovered." Caspian nodded his acknowledgement, but his attention was focused on the woman sitting beside him. Serafina wore a navy business suit that complemented her role as the company's newly appointed director of international art acquisitions, a position that legitimized her years of underground expertise while providing Eldridge Corporation with an entirely new revenue stream. "Which brings us to our final agenda item," Board member Thomas Harrison said. "The proposed expansion into art investment and cultural asset management." Serafina stood, activating the presentation display with practiced confidence. "The art market represents a $2 trillion global economy that's largely untapped by traditional financial institutions. By leveraging Eldridge Corporation's international banking relationships with specialized art expertise, we can offer clients diversification opportunities that didn't exist 6 months ago." The presentation was flawless, detailing market projections, risk assessments, and profit margins that made even the most conservative board members lean forward with interest. Caspian watched his wife command the room with the same intensity she had once reserved for their private investigations, and felt pride surge through his chest. "The pilot program launched 3 months ago has already generated $12 million in revenue," Serafina continued. "We have inquiries from 17 major collectors and 3 museums interested in our acquisition services." "Outstanding work, Mrs. Eldridge," Patricia said. "I think it's safe to say the board fully supports this expansion." The vote was unanimous. As the board members filed out, discussing lunch plans and quarterly projections, Caspian remained seated beside his wife, marveling at how completely their lives had transformed. "Director of International Art Acquisitions," he said. "Has a nice ring to it. Better than Ghost Wife, certainly." Serafina gathered her presentation materials. "Though I do miss the mystery of operating under a pseudonym." "No more mysteries," Caspian said, standing and offering her his arm. "We promised each other complete honesty, remember? I remember everything about that promise. Especially the part where you said we'd start our marriage over the right way." They walked through the Eldridge Corporation headquarters together, past employees who no longer whispered about the scandal, but instead nodded respectfully to both the CEO and his business partner. The transformation hadn't been easy. Rebuilding trust, restructuring operations, and healing from trauma had required months of therapy, long conversations, and gradual reconstruction of their relationship. "Speaking of starting over," Caspian said as they reached the executive elevator, "I have something for you." He pulled a small velvet box from his jacket pocket, and Serafina's breath caught. "Caspian, we're already married. We had a wedding. We've never had a marriage." He opened the box to reveal a stunning emerald ring surrounded by diamonds. "This was my grandmother's engagement ring. The one I should have given you 5 years ago if I hadn't been too damaged to recognize what I was receiving." Serafina stared at the ring, then at her husband's face. "Are you proposing to me? I'm asking you to marry me again. Properly this time, with full knowledge of who we both are and what we're choosing." He took her left hand, noting the simple gold band she had worn faithfully for 5 years despite their estrangement. "I'm asking you to let me love you the way you deserve to be loved from the beginning." "Yes," she whispered, and her voice broke slightly on the word. "Yes, absolutely yes." He slipped the emerald ring onto her finger alongside her wedding band, and the symbolism wasn't lost on either of them. Past and present, promise and fulfillment, the woman she had been and the woman she had become. The kiss that followed would have been inappropriate for a corporate elevator if either of them had cared about corporate protocol. 3 weeks later, they stood in the gardens of the Eldridge estate, surrounded by 50 of their closest friends and family members for a vow renewal ceremony that bore no resemblance to their original wedding. Gone were the hundreds of political acquaintances and business obligations. This gathering included Octavia, who had become one of Serafina's closest friends, Mrs. Holloway, who had maintained their household through 5 years of silent suffering and 6 months of chaos, and the handful of people who had supported them through the darkest period of their lives. The ceremony was officiated by Judge Catherine Mills, Jonathan Mills' sister, who had volunteered her services after everything the family had endured. The vows they spoke were written by themselves, honest words about forgiveness, growth, and the choice to love despite fear. 5 years ago, I promised to honor and cherish you, Caspian said, his voice carrying across the garden. I failed that promise because I was too afraid of my own capacity for destruction to recognize your capacity for healing. Today I promise to trust you with my worst fears and my deepest hopes, because I've learned that love isn't about protecting each other from pain. It's about facing pain together and emerging stronger. Serafina's response brought tears to half the assembled guests. 5 years ago, I promised to love you in sickness and in health, for better or worse. I've kept that promise even when love felt impossible, even when I thought you didn't want it. Today I promise to never again accept less than I deserve, because I've learned that true partnership requires both people to show up completely. I choose you, Caspian, not because our marriage was arranged, but because you're the man I want to build a life with. The rings they exchanged were new, matching platinum bands engraved with the coordinates of the garden where they were standing, a permanent reminder of the place where their real marriage began. The reception was held in the same ballroom where they had celebrated their original wedding, but the atmosphere couldn't have been more different. Instead of stiff formality, there was laughter. Instead of polite distance, there was dancing. Instead of obligation, there was joy. Caspian and Serafina's first dance as truly married partners was to a song she had chosen, At Last by Etta James, because it captured exactly how they both felt about finally finding their way to each other. No regrets about the past 5 years, Serafina asked as they swayed together. Only that it took us so long to get here, Caspian replied. But maybe we needed those years to become the people who could handle this kind of happiness. Very philosophical for a billionaire CEO. I've been learning from my wife. She's quite wise. Your wife is also quite pregnant. Caspian stopped dancing. What? Serafina's smile was radiant. Surprise. I found out this morning. I was going to wait until after the ceremony, but dancing seemed like the perfect moment to share the news. The kiss that followed was witnessed by everyone at their reception, and the cheers that erupted when Caspian lifted Serafina off her feet suggested that their guests approved of the announcement. 1 year later, Serafina stood in the main gallery of Monterey Modern, the contemporary art space she had opened in Tribeca 6 months after their vow renewal. The gallery occupied the top 2 floors of a converted warehouse, with soaring windows that flooded the space with natural light and exposed brick walls that provided the perfect backdrop for the cutting-edge art she specialized in acquiring. The Rothko installation is generating significant interest. Her assistant Marcus, named after Marcus Flynn, in honor of the gallery director who had died helping her investigate Sterling, announced as he approached with the day's sales reports. 3 serious inquiries, including one from the Whitney. Museums are always welcome, but let's prioritize private collectors for this piece, Serafina said, adjusting the lighting on a sculpture that had arrived that morning. The Rothko deserves to be in a home where it will be appreciated daily, not stored in a museum vault 90% of the time. At 8 months pregnant, Serafina moved more slowly than she once had, but her eye for art and talent for negotiation remained as sharp as ever. Monterey Modern had become one of the most respected galleries in New York within its first year, representing emerging artists alongside established masters and facilitating acquisitions for clients who appreciated both artistic value and investment potential. Mrs. Eldridge, Marcus said, "Your husband is here." Caspian appeared in the gallery entrance, still wearing his business suit from a morning of board meetings, but carrying coffee and pastries from Serafina's favorite bakery. "Thought you might need fuel," he said, kissing her cheek and placing a protective hand on her rounded belly. "How's our future art critic today?" "Active. I think she approves of the new installation." Serafina accepted the coffee gratefully. "How did the quarterly review go?" Eldridge Corporation posted record profits for the 3rd consecutive quarter. The art investment division now represents 15% of our total revenue. Caspian smiled. "Your idea to branch into cultural asset management was the best business decision I've ever made." "Our idea. We're partners, remember?" "I remember everything about being your partner." They stood together in the gallery, surrounded by art that represented human creativity at its finest, planning the future of both their business empire and their growing family. The space felt alive with possibility, much like their marriage. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Sterling's plan had succeeded?" Serafina asked. "Never," Caspian said without hesitation. "We're exactly where we're supposed to be, when we're supposed to be here. The past brought us to this moment, and this moment is perfect." As if in agreement, their daughter kicked enthusiastically, and they both laughed. Outside the gallery windows, Manhattan hummed with its usual energy. Millions of people pursuing their dreams, building their lives, reaching for their own versions of happiness. But inside Monterey Modern, 2 people who had found their way through betrayal and conspiracy to genuine love watched the sunset paint the city in shades of gold. Their empire hadn't just survived the flames that had nearly consumed it. It had been reborn stronger, more beautiful, and more authentic than either of them had dared to imagine possible. The ghost wife had become a flesh-and-blood woman, fully claimed and completely cherished. The billionaire who had been afraid to love had learned that some risks were worth everything, and their story was just beginning.